guys, it's Lizzie. Today I thought I'd make a more personal story time talking about something that happened to me throughout middle school and high school that still affects me to this day. I sometimes still cry reflecting on my younger self, and as I've gotten older, it's actually gotten worse having even more perspective. And it's wild to me that things that happen during your most formative years can leave wounds that a decade later can still hurt. Becoming Catholic and converting out of my old church has been experiencing this whole new reality for women's roles, and it's been this continual process of being stunned and shocked and feeling so loved and uplifted, and then so confused, but then excited and how can this be real? Some disclaimers before I get into this video. This is not representative of all Protestant churches, obviously. It is also not representative of all Churches of Christ Protestant churches. There are many Churches of Christ on the West Coast in California, Oregon, Washington, and possibly other parts of the country that I don't know of that have nothing like what I'm about to share happening in their congregations. But then there are thousands of churches worldwide that are exactly like this, and tens of thousands of women and girls could make a video exactly like this. Another disclaimer, in general, I absolutely loved my experience growing up in Churches of Christ. I love Church of Christ so much, and that's why it was so heartbreaking leaving and becoming Catholic, because I felt so loyal to it and I had just been so loved, and so many people had poured into me amazing knowledge and wisdom about the Bible, and it was just the most flourishing, educational, family-like home environment. And that's why this one detail hurt so much, because you're in a situation where you're being so loved and poured into and taken care of, and then there's this one thing that happens that feels so wrong. And this even seeped into my YouTube channel. When I made Protestant videos, I would get comments and video responses where it was always men would quote these verses at me. So I'm gonna read a few Bible verses and then talk about how my church interpreted them. 1 Corinthians 14:34. Women should remain silent in the churches. They are not allowed to speak, but must be in submission, as the law says. If they want to inquire about something, they should ask their own husbands at home, for it is disgraceful for a woman to speak in the church. 1 Timothy 2:11-15. A woman should learn in quietness and full submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not the one deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. But women will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with propriety. So my church took these passages literally. We were going by the Bible, and in some ways I respect that. They were going by the Bible. They were literally going by the Bible and not cherry picking. So in the worship setting, women were not allowed to preach, lead worship, pray, read scripture. Women didn't even pass the collection plates when we were collecting money, and especially when we were doing the communion, which we believed in the memorial view of communion, passing around the crackers and the grape juice, only men could do that. The way the leadership structure was set up, we had deacons, elders, and a preacher. A lot of churches call it a pastor, but we called it a preacher. So these were all men. So basically during worship, the only people at the front were men. Bible class was complicated. If it was all women, a woman could be teaching, but if there were men who were baptized in the room, then a woman couldn't teach. So the way baptism worked is teenagers got baptized, but sometimes it would be as young as elementary school. To give some background, my family moved around so much because of my dad's job and because my parents were missionaries. So we lived in Russia for 5 years, then we moved to Ohio where my dad was getting his PhD. Then my dad got his first teaching job and we moved to Indiana and lived there for 5 years. And then my dad got a different job and we moved to Florida and lived there for 5 years. And then I moved to California for college and am still here. In Indiana, I was 8 years old to 12 when I was in 7th grade. And I remember so many times teaching the children's Bible classes, and during the sermon we would have children's Bible hour. So all the kids would come to the fellowship hall, which was also where we had potlucks, and we had like a giant carpet, and so my family would help and teach the children's classes all the time. And I remember when I got to middle school, I got into the youth group and we had Bible class in the youth group house. And I was even able to lead a devotional there once on Wednesday night. When we moved to Florida, we were actually warned that Church of Christ in Florida was extremely conservative. And I don't know if they wanted us to not move or not, but it was I remember I was there when our youth minister was talking to my parents, and wow, we were in for a change. In youth group, women were not allowed to lead prayers. So it wasn't just the formal worship setting, it was like we were hanging out with our friends before Bible class and I couldn't pray. One experience I had when I was 15 that was particularly scarring was when I was teaching the 4th and 5th grade class. So think about this. I'm 15, I'm teaching people who are 9 and 10 years old. It was my 2nd week teaching the class, and during that week, one of the boys had just gotten baptized. And so in my church, people got baptized anywhere from middle school to high school. This was an earlier age to get baptized. It was kind of the vibe of that church, and my parents actually didn't like it. They thought that people should be getting baptized when they're older. This man, part of the church, marches into the classroom, yells at me and says, "You are a woman! You're not allowed to teach a baptized boy!" I was shocked and my eyes started tearing up. I almost started crying. And I was in front of all these children, so I wanted to keep my composure and just be strong and keep teaching the class. The next Sunday, I come back and my favorite elder, who I had grown really close to and respected so much, he came up to me and said that someone had been chosen to replace me for the class. That experience became cemented in my mind because it was this community where I trusted everyone and felt so loved. But then the leadership shut me down and I wasn't able to use my mind and my ideas to pour in to children. Soon after this, I started my YouTube channel, and if that hadn't happened, I don't think I would have started my YouTube channel. I began talking about Christianity and apologetics and faith. And it was this outlet because I couldn't talk about my faith at my church, but I could on YouTube. It was also an interesting experience at that church because anytime we had all girls classes, all we talked about was guys, dating, marriage, and dressing modestly as to not cause guys to lust and sin. It was so interesting because at the time I was going to an art school and I was excelling on the speech and debate team and winning tournaments, and I was in leadership at clubs at my school, and so I was doing so much public speaking and leadership. But then at my own church in my faith community, I wasn't allowed to use my gifts. And I even joked about this in a video I uploaded to my channel, Stuff Church of Christ People Say, and I joked about it, but it was real. I'm a Bible major.
What are you going to do with a Bible degree?
Sometimes I feel like the appendix in the body of Christ.
Why aren't women allowed to count money in church? It doesn't involve talking.
Well, some people count out loud.
A lot of people talk about how there's not sexism in our society anymore, that women can do anything that men can do, but this is a situation where it's subliminally teaching women that we can't be leaders, we can't be intellectual, we can't study religion. Last fall, I was visiting my boyfriend on his campus when he just started his PhD program, and I actually started crying in kind of a joy, shock emotion when he was explaining how he had female professors and how there were so many women who were part of his program. I was amazed that there were women who were becoming religion scholars and women getting PhDs. I had another experience with a subscriber who I was hanging out with and becoming friends with, and she was a senior in college studying theology and philosophy, and she said she wanted to get her PhD and become a religion professor, and she was casually talking about it, so passionate, so excited. And it stunned me again how it was so obvious to her that she saw her life going this way, that as a female she could be a religion scholar. It was so ingrained to me in my church. Why study religion? You can do nothing with that degree. You're not going to be able to get a job. Women can't preach, women can't teach. Stuff like this continued to happen to me even overseas. When I was in college, I spent my summers teaching English with the Bible at a Church of Christ in Thailand, and women were also not allowed to pray, even in casual settings. And I remember multiple times, I was actually with my missions trip team, and we were praying in kind of an open area where other people were hanging out and talking, and I prayed with my team members and I was reprimanded later, and this happened multiple times because I would forget, and I was told you can't pray. I went to Pepperdine University for college, which is a Churches of Christ school, and during our new student orientation, I remember we were all in a giant room and the female campus minister stepped up to a podium, took the mic, and led a prayer. And I started crying that a woman was able to lead a public prayer in this place with so many adult men. I was surprised and shocked and amazed and so happy. And throughout my entire experience at Pepperdine as a woman, I was allowed to lead a sermon, to lead the communion accounts, which is kind of funny because someone would come up and lead like a 5 to 10 minute devotional talking about the crucifixion. So I could do that as a woman, and there were women up leading the singing, and women could lead prayers, and women could read scripture. And I'm sure this seems so silly to you guys right now that I'm tearing up thinking about this, but when you grow up your entire life and you're such a dominant personality and so intellectual like I am, and you're taught your entire life that you're not allowed to lead and you're not allowed to speak, and what's the point of being intellectual? You can't even get a job in the future if you study religion. It really, really affects you. And I think that if I hadn't grown up in this environment, I would have gone forward and gotten a master's degree in religion or gotten a PhD in something. And I think because of this environment, it ingrained in me to not want to be that ambitious with my life. And I've talked to other people who've had such a similar experience. There was one girl at my college who made a Facebook post a few years ago talking about how she never talked during class discussions in our philosophy program because she grew up in Church of Christ and was taught that her voice, that she shouldn't speak, that she shouldn't use her voice. And she said that in her secular PhD philosophy program, she feels more loved and needed there than she ever did in church growing up. But then each summer when I was in college, I went to Thailand to do missions work with the Church of Christ there. And it was back to what it was like growing up, except worse. I know a lot of people are going to ask why I was willing to move to Thailand if the church was like that there. And it is the same reason I love Church of Christ all of growing up, because it's like a family. Everyone is so close, and there are just amazing memories of singing a cappella 4-part harmonies together, watching your best friends get baptized, so many Bible classes and games and meals together, and hanging out at church all day. It's like a paradise. It's amazing. I absolutely love the church I worked at in Thailand and all my churches growing up, and so it's like this one thing that is so painful and doesn't feel right, and I was willing to just keep the peace. And I talked to the church leaders there. They knew I disagreed with them, but I was willing to keep the peace and to love them anyways and to stay. Immediately upon becoming Catholic, everything changed when my story was shared by EWTN. I was getting requests to publish my story in a book, to teach and lead speaking engagements. People wanted me to teach baptized women and men. It has been the most loved and affirmed I've ever felt in my spiritual gifts, and I don't think anyone will understand unless it's another Church of Christ girl how healing it is and how loved I feel when I get a request to speak or when I'm asked to be on someone else's YouTube channel. I remember in 2017 when I was deciding whether or not to convert into Catholicism, I was also considering Episcopal, and I thought it would disempower and psychologically harm children if they didn't grow up in an environment where there were women priests. I was just thinking, if I have a daughter in the future, how will she react? How will she feel? What will the repercussions be about this years later when she's on to being an adult? And now I know that if I do have daughters, they will be so empowered to teach and lead and be intellectual and to serve the church in any of their giftedness. Going back to the passage in 1 Corinthians 14, women should remain silent in the churches. I remember when I was 14 years old reading through 1 Corinthians on my own, as I often did. I would just read the Bible by myself all the time. And I remember getting to 1 Corinthians 11:5 and reading, "But every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. It is the same as having her head shaved." I wasn't interested in the head covering part, but the fact that it says every woman who prays or prophesies. So it shows that in those early Christian communities, women were speaking, they were leading worship, they were publicly praying in front of the church. I showed this passage to the pastor of my church at the time, and I remember bringing my Bible over to him and showing it to him and asking him, what does it mean? And I don't even remember what he said, but he kind of shooed me away. And I remember bringing it up even with my youth minister and other kids in the youth group, and they would just quote back at me the 1 Timothy verse and the 1 Corinthians 14 verse, and it was like ingrained into them, this is how it was, and it wasn't going to change. Now, I want to share a legitimate exegesis of these two passages in 1 Corinthians and 2 Timothy about women. A lot of people will look at these passages, 1 Corinthians 14:34, women must be silent in the church, and 1 Timothy 2:11, a woman must learn in quietness and full submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man, she must be quiet. A lot of churches of Christ look at these passages and interpret them as women did not have a public ministry role in the early Christian communities. Absolutely not. Women are leading the congregations in worship, praying and prophesying out loud. Christianity was revolutionary in that it was educating women in religion and letting them be teachers and missionaries. Obviously, women are not being completely silent in the church. We can understand this 1 Timothy verse to be empowering in that it's telling women who are not educated in any other area of society to listen and learn. Most of them coming in were illiterate, never trained in rhetoric, rarely taken on by rabbis. People like Josephus and Philo of Alexandria were even worse, demeaning women. So they're learning submissively because they're starting at a zero. And as they become more educated, they are teaching others, teaching men, and doing ministry. Phoebe, Priscilla, Junia, Euodia, Cynthia. In these seemingly sexist passages, Paul is advocating for women to be educated in Christianity. And as we've seen throughout church history and are seeing today in Catholicism, although the apostolic ministry of being priests, bishops, and deacons is only men, everything else is available for women. I love you guys so much. Comment below if you want me to make more story time type videos. Make sure that you are subscribed to my channel and click the bell button next to the subscribe button, and make sure to be following me on my Instagram and Twitter. I love you guys so much, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!